My name is Kade Crockford. Thank you so much for having me. I work for the ACLU in Boston. I'm the director of something called the Technology for Liberty Project. So I work on surveillance issues primarily. And someone said, I think it was you, who said that you didn't think you're looking at this list. By the way, do folks have this piece of paper? Everybody got one of these? Is there a stack still somewhere? Yes, there is. Okay. So if we could get those to people who don't have them, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Who doesn't have one?
Oh, it looks like that corner. Okay. So, I was sort of surprised when you said that because I have been doing this work at the ACLU in Boston since 2009. So right after Obama came into office is when I started doing this work. And I came and spoke to a group of some of you here, there are some familiar faces in this room, a few years ago. And we talked about, and I have to say, it was a lot fewer of you then under the Obama administration who came out to hear me talk about these issues. And a lot of these problems we had then too. So, I don't want to diminish the gravity of the threats that we face as a nation, as a state, as a world in terms of the climate. With this new president and the new administration, we do face a slew of new threats. But the reality is that the law, unfortunately, has not kept pace with technology in Massachusetts or at the federal level under the Obama administration either. And I'm not just saying that because the ACLU is a nonpartisan organization, which we are. I'm saying it because it's true. Unfortunately, both here in Massachusetts, which is, as you know, a blue state, despite our governor, and at the federal level, under the past 8 years of the Obama administration, we have not succeeded as a country in passing the laws that we've needed to do, that we've needed to pass rather, to make sure that these little devices we can use to the best of our ability and as much as we want, and in ways that we never could have dreamed of 10 years ago without needlessly compromising our privacy. Unfortunately, that didn't happen under the Democrats, and it still obviously hasn't happened, which means that we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do that is a continuation of the work that we've been doing for the past 8 years, because while President Obama did a lot of great things, he didn't do everything that we needed, and we have a lot of work to do on the state level, frankly. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. First, the ACLU, what is it? Second, some threats that we face, some new threats actually that we face because of this new administration. And despite the fact that the ACLU is a nonpartisan organization, that doesn't mean that we're blind, nor does it mean that we close our ears to the reality of the policies that the new administration has committed to undertaking. And we oppose the vast majority of those policies. So it's not about the party in power, it's about the things that he's saying he wants to do. A lot of those things are deeply concerning to us at the ACLU. And you might have seen, if you follow us on Twitter or Facebook, that we've already been activated. We haven't waited. Day one, we have taken action. The National ACLU also has said very clearly in no uncertain terms, we're going to sue you if you do the things that you've pledged you will do. And certainly here in Massachusetts, we will be suing a lot of government agencies as well as we normally do, and again have done for the past 8 years under the Obama administration. So I'm going to talk about the ACLU, threats that we face, some opportunities that we face, and then I'm going to close by giving you some things that you can do here in Foxborough and here in Massachusetts. So what is the ACLU? The ACLU is the nation's oldest civil rights and civil liberties organization. We've been around almost 100 years. We were founded in 1920, and the Boston office was actually one of our first offices nationwide. We now have offices in all 50 states, which makes us pretty different from most civil rights and progressive and civil liberties organizations in the country. So we work in state legislatures, we work in Congress, we work in state and federal courts, and of course we work in communities doing public education like this, as well as lots of research and report writing, generating information about what's going on behind closed doors in government at every level when government agencies frequently don't want the public to know about things that they're doing. We have, I'm not just saying this because I work for the ACLU. I think that the fabric of this country would look profoundly different had it not been for the contributions of ACLU attorneys throughout the past 100 years. The First Amendment would look profoundly different. In fact, we were founded in the wake of World War I as a response to crackdowns on anti-war speech during World War I. So I don't know if you know this, but Upton Sinclair, the guy who wrote famous novel The Jungle about actually workers in Chicago, he was arrested for reading the text of the First Amendment at a public demonstration in 1917. And that was one of the acts that spurred the creation of the ACLU, was the defense of people like Upton Sinclair who were arrested for really simple speech acts that today, because of the ACLU's successful litigation and lobbying throughout the past 100 years, people would think is completely crazy, right? But the law is only the way that it is today because we fought for that. And not just those lawyers, but all people, right? Like you said, when you were in Washington the other day, you were there with hundreds of thousands of other people who are expressing their First Amendment rights. That is critical because if we don't express and flex those rights, we lose them. They're like muscles. They atrophy if you don't flex them. So we need to practice civic engagement. And that's not up to the ACLU. That's up to all of us as residents and citizens here in the United States. So that's what the ACLU does. Again, here in Massachusetts, we do lobbying at the state legislature. We write legislation. So the bills that you're seeing on the first page of this sheet here, we actually wrote. And we will be pushing hard for those state bills to pass in this coming legislative session, which just started in January and lasts for 2 years. And we obviously fight in the courts too. So my colleagues in the legal department are just incredible. I mean, they are some of the most brilliant attorneys, so hardworking and super effective. Just last week, you might have read that a Supreme Judicial Court decision came down in one of our biggest cases right now, which is called Bridgman versus District Attorneys. You're probably familiar with the two drug lab scandals that have unfolded over the past couple of years in Massachusetts. One of them was the Annie Ducan scandal, where she was working at the Hinton Drug Lab in Jamaica Plain and falsifying evidence, basically. So 20-some thousand people, 24,000 about people were convicted based on that tainted evidence. And just last week, the SJC finally ruled in a case where we essentially sued the district attorneys, demanding that they dismiss all of those cases that were tainted by Annie Ducan's misconduct. The Supreme Court, the Supreme Judicial Court, the High Court of Massachusetts basically agreed with us. The DAs have tried to spun it differently in the press, but the court effectively said to the DAs, you need to go through and dismiss the vast majority of these convictions. And if there are a couple that you think you can hold on to and retry with separate evidence, that's fine. But we want to see a list of the vast majority of these that you'll dismiss. So we consider that to be a really important victory. That's a good example, I think, of a theme that I'm going to touch on later, the drug lab scandal, that is, which is that we like to think of ourselves as a very progressive state in Massachusetts. But in a lot of ways, we're not. Our policies and our laws are not nearly as progressive as they should be, especially given how progressive we are as a people, right? And the drug lab is a good example of that. In places like Texas, there have been similar scandals where government agencies were found to have, falsified evidence, or there was corruption inside a forensics lab. And in places like Texas, it wasn't even really a debate. They just wiped away all those convictions. But not here, not in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, it took a 4-year-long lawsuit by the ACLU to get a verdict like this. The DAs were clinging to those cases. So I would remind you also that district attorneys are elected officials. And we often forget that. We often treat them as if they are just like police chiefs, but they're not. We can actually sponsor people to run against them and have real debates about criminal justice and how it's doled out and how prosecutors use their power. And we frankly don't have those debates as much as we need to in Massachusetts. So we're also pushing for a much larger conversation about the role of DAs. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the ACLU. Now I'm going to talk about some threats that we face. I don't have to tell you that we face threats to our basic rights under this administration. Under the Obama administration, we at the ACLU were not pleased with the Obama administration's approach to privacy, frankly, or to the drone operations that he was conducting in many parts of the world where we didn't have declared wars. And you probably have read about our lawsuits against the NSA, against the FBI, against the CIA over the torture scandal, which unfortunately Obama never really sufficiently dealt with. He did not bring prosecutions against any of the Bush administration officials who were involved in the torture program. And so that's why we're reading headlines now in the New York Times that President Donald Trump intends maybe to open new CIA black sites and restart those torture programs, because nobody was ever punished for that kind of illegal activity when it took place under Bush. So, we at the ACLU, I have to say, I'm very proud to work for this organization because we are not wishy-washy. We don't care what color your team flags, whether it's red or blue. We have principles, and we stand by those principles. And if the president is a Democrat and he violates those principles, we will sue him. Mm-hmm. And if the president is a Republican and she violates those principles, we will sue her too. So having said all of that, I'm deeply frightened. As a queer person who just watched a couple summers ago the Supreme Court, say something that I honestly, growing up as a queer kid in Massachusetts, never could have dreamed of, right? That gay marriage is legal. And I don't even think I will probably ever get married, but that's pretty cool, right? That the highest court in our nation has said very clearly that gay people have equal rights in the United States. That's under threat now because Donald Trump is going to appoint a Supreme Court justice, if not more than one, during his 4-year presidency at least. So gay marriage is just one of the things that is threatened by his administration. Certainly all of women's health issues are really going to be facing major threats, in part because of the attack on the ACA, obviously. And here in Massachusetts, women can be impacted by that, especially low-income women when it comes to paying for birth control and family planning and health services. Again, I'm gay, so I don't worry about getting pregnant, but I do worry about cervical cancer. And it's not acceptable, I don't think, that anyone in our society should have to fear that they may die simply because they don't have access to health insurance. So we fear for women's health under this administration, which has already acknowledged that it opposes abortion. Mike Pence, who is the vice president, and many people have said is probably really the shadow ruler, either him or Steve Bannon, the white supremacist former Breitbart editor who is Trump's right-hand man. Mike Pence is a really dangerous guy. I personally, this is not the ACLU's view, but I personally think he actually deeply hates women. That's what I've gathered from reading about what he did as the governor of Indiana. Some really frightening stuff that made it much more likely for women to die, frankly. So that's deeply frightening. We also face new and more dangerous threats to privacy. So, I take no pleasure in saying this, but one of the things that the ACLU has said, and I've said over and over and over for the past 8 years, is we have to be worried about the incredibly powerful, incredibly secretive surveillance state that the Obama administration has created in the shadows, not only because, and not even because we don't trust Barack Obama, right? Primarily because you cannot predict the future, right? And so even if you trust Barack Obama, are you going to trust the next person who comes into this office and has the keys to that effectively totalitarian system of control? And I think that probably a lot of you in the room right now would say, clearly the answer is no. You do not trust the person who currently sits in that office and holds those keys. Mike Pompeo, who is Trump's CIA pick, is someone who has... I encourage you to look this up. He co-wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal in the wake of the Snowden revelations a few years ago, in which he said some really disturbing, frightening stuff about the kind of surveillance state that he wants to see. He said that not only was the phone records program, which you probably remember was the first thing that Snowden disclosed, a program that involved the NSA hoovering up records of every single phone call in the country and data mining them, storing them for many years. That program had been operational for about 10 years at least when Snowden disclosed it. Not only Mike Pompeo said, should we keep that program alive, but we should actually enrich it with more information about Americans' lifestyles and about their non-internet activity. So to create effectively what John Poindexter, who had worked for the Bush administration, wanted to do way back when, after 9/11, which was called a system of total information awareness. This is just naked authoritarianism. So this is the man who Trump has nodded for his CIA director, and he is now the director of the CIA. And you should know also that the CIA is not only an espionage agency, it's not only an intelligence agency. The CIA now has the power to kill people through its drone program. And that, frankly, is a gift that Obama left us. So Obama also left us this very dangerous gift of the CIA's ability to kill Americans with drones without charge or trial, which is what happened to Anwar al-Awlaki, who is a U.S. citizen, and actually his 16-year-old son, Abdurrahman al-Awlaki, who was born in Denver and was killed by a CIA drone missile. Okay, that's a lot of really scary information. A couple more though. There's also a really serious threat to our freedom of speech and to the freedom of the press, which is deeply frightening to me. You may have read just today that Steve Bannon, again, told the New York Times in a phone call with a New York Times reporter, essentially, we're coming after you and we hate the press and America hates the press and you should be afraid because this administration will give you no cover, basically. This is deeply frightening language that he is using directly, with his name attached to it, not saying, I want this on background or anything like a senior administration official. No, he said you can print my name next to this. Every time Trump gets up in front of a mic, he talks about the dishonest, lying media. And sure, we've all had our problems with the media. I frankly have problems with the New York Times, like the fact that it led us into an illegal war based on lies in 2003, right? But we also, I think, recognize, most of us, the value of a free press. And for the President of the United States and his chief advisor to be making noises like this about journalism, the most sacred institution in the United States, is deeply frightening. One more thing. I think for those of you who are old enough to remember, and for those of you who have read history, so even if you're not old enough to remember, you may know this, this administration is already sort of displaying signs of Nixonianism, right? A penchant for obsessive secrecy, a penchant for basic vengeance, right, against political enemies, real thin-skinned attitude. And these are frightening trends when we think about all the other things that we know about the Trump administration, right? It's declared war on the press. It's hostility towards women. It's hostility towards immigrants and people of color. If you go and look at Trump's website, it's absolutely chilling. He has a section called Support Our Law Enforcement Nationwide, which, sounds fine. And then you click on it, and it's basically a recipe for a police state, for living in a police state. He says things like, we will live in a society free of crime and violence. Okay, so that's not going to happen, just so you know. There's no society free of crime or violence. Maybe North Korea. And that's exactly what we do not want to emulate in the United States, right? I'm not a big fan of crime and violence. People get shot in my neighborhood a lot, actually, and I'm not okay with that. But I frankly would rather live in a free society than in a place where there's no crime and no violence. And I think probably most of you agree that's what makes us as Americans, I think, different from lots of countries in the world, is that we recognize the inherent value in freedom. And we place that above anything else, right? The American Library Association famously said in the 1940s, I believe it was, freedom is a dangerous way of life and it's ours, right? Well, I believe that strongly, and I hope you do too. Okay, so that's a lot of threats. There are also a lot of opportunities. One of them is, I didn't say the most important threat. The most important and the most dangerous threat, and the thing that scares me the most, honestly, is that the people in this room don't do anything. That's the greatest threat that we face in the next 4 years, is that we do not act. Is that the fear that you have about everything that I just said immobilizes you. Or that, you just turn off. You can't read any more information about what's going on because it's too depressing. And so you just watch Netflix, or you just take solace in how cute your grandkids are, and you don't think about it, and you don't do anything about it because it's too much to deal with. That is truly the greatest threat that we face. So I just ask you to remember that, and if you're feeling like you can't do it anymore, just take a break. You know, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can take a break and get back to it. Mental health is important, obviously, but you know, so is defending what we hold most dear. Okay, so what are the opportunities? Again, major opportunity is that there are probably 5 times the number of people in this room than there were the last time I came to speak, which is great. That's really great. That's a huge opportunity. You saw all those people in DC. That's an opportunity. There are people fired up all over this country, all over this state, all over this town, I'm sure, who are terrified and they're angry. And every time they turn on the television or they listen to the radio, they hear something that enrages them or makes them fear for their children's future. That's an opportunity, and we have to seize it. Another opportunity is that we can use all of that energy to build coalitions that we couldn't have built before, and to sustain them with energy that we didn't have before. I want to say something that is maybe obvious to you all because you're a Democratic Party activists, so you probably know this, but I don't think it can be said enough. We need to hold our elected officials accountable. It does not matter what party they're in. I've written your 2 state elected officials up here. Foxborough folks, you have a Republican representative and a Democratic senator. And your Democratic senator actually runs the Public Safety Committee. He's the chair of the Public Safety Committee, so he has a lot of power, actually. So that means you in this room have a lot of power over some really important reforms that are going to be coming down the pike. A couple of them are actually reforms that we're supporting. They're likely to go before his committee. So we're going to be calling on you to call on him to do the right thing. And this is so important. I mean, this is how the Tea Party took over America, right? Is by people simply picking up the phone. Is by ordinary people figuring out where my elected official is going to be next Tuesday. Oh, there's a pancake breakfast? Go. Go. Get in their face. Tell them what you want. Tell them what scares you. Demand that they take action on the things that are important to you. Don't be afraid. It's like, you know, and if you are afraid, find a friend to go with you. Or, you know, have a friend sit next to you when you make your first phone call. And the more you do it, the more used to it you'll get, and the less it'll be scary, and the more you'll realize the impact that it has. So there's a group of people who used to work on the Hill in DC who wrote this guidebook, essentially. You might have seen it. It's been going around the internet. They're now calling it Indivisible. You should look it up if you haven't heard of it. And they're basically just teaching people on the left, progressives who are frightened now about what's happening in this country under Trump, how to engage in effective lobbying as an ordinary person, not as someone who has the resources of the ACLU, but just as an ordinary community member wherever you live in the United States. And the most important takeaway from that is to call your elected representatives. I have made a commitment to myself to call once a day. I'm not sure, you know, whatever I see in the news, the thing that pisses me off the most, I have Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey's phone numbers in my phone, saved under their names, in my favorites. Yeah.
I have a question. Is it more effective to call or not?
Great question. It is 1,000 times more effective to call. 1,000 times more effective. So you will see, if you sign up for the ACLU's mailing list, which I hope you have, that we're going to be emailing you about once a week, asking you to take action on some ACLU-related issue. Please take action. Often those actions we are asking you to email. And, you know, if you can get 20,000 people to send an email, then that does have an impact. They hear that, right? But calls are still way more impactful. So we will be asking folks to make phone calls, definitely.
Kate, I have the link for that Indivisible
Oh, excellent.
information.
Cool.
So we can get this up tonight.
Great. So yeah, it's absolutely worth reading. But the central point that they're trying to make is that you should call your representatives and your senators at every level, at the state level and at the federal level, whenever you can. So like I said, I have Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey's phone numbers in my phone now, and I just call them every morning. The thing that pissed me off the most that I heard on the news on BUR when I was getting dressed, I call them about it. You know, this morning it was that, you know, there was this bill that was passed in the House, Goodlatte's bill in the House, to basically gut government regulations, right? And this is going to impact just unimaginable numbers of things that I care about, including drinking water that doesn't have poison in it and having drugs that have been tested so that I won't die when I take them. These are things that I care about, right? Because I'm a sentient human being. And so I called Elizabeth Warren this morning and I said, this is not an ACLU position either, but I said, you better filibuster that bill. When this bill comes up before the Senate, you filibuster. And if you don't, I'm not voting for you. Goodbye. And if there's a pancake breakfast where she shows up somewhere, or these people show up trying to shake hands and fundraise, you go. And you can shake their hand, and you can be nice to them. This is not like, you don't have to be hostile, but the point is that they should not be able to go anywhere without constituents telling them exactly what the constituents want from them in office. They work for you. It's not the other way around. And we need to start acting like that. I think that, especially here in Massachusetts, we think, the Hill is a pretty democratic place. They're probably doing a good job. I don't have to worry about it too much. State policy doesn't really mean that much. State policy is everything. And right now, state politics are the game. We're not going to be able to have an impact, the people in this room, on what the decisions that the CIA is going to make under Mike Pompeo. The ACLU is going to fight those fights. But we as individual residents here in Massachusetts can actually have a real impact on the bills that get passed at the State House. And that is what we have to do over the next 4 years, is focus on that. Because issues like the fact that we are the #1 incarcerator per capita of any country in the world, that's not a federal issue. That's a state and local issue. Over 90% of people who are locked up in this country are locked up in state and local prisons and jails, not in federal prisons. And so there's a ton that we can do at the state level to deal with problems like that. There's a ton that we can do at the state level, even to address threats that we're facing from the federal level, like with immigration raids, like with privacy issues. We can tell our state and local police not to share information with Trump's FBI. We can tell the Registry of Motor Vehicles not to allow the FBI access to its driver's license data bank of images, which it currently shares with the FBI. If we're seriously worried that Trump's FBI is going to start coming after dissidents and Muslims and people of color in Massachusetts, our neighbors, our friends, ourselves, our family members, then we have to start acting like that threat is real. And if it is real, then we have to tell the state police, don't cooperate with the FBI unless it's a documented investigation or you have a warrant. These are, basic issues that we frankly didn't deal with under the Obama administration. And as a result, we're now struggling with some very serious threats to, again, our most fundamental rights. So I'm going to wrap up in a minute. But before I do that, I want to talk about some very specific things that we would love for you to do if you're interested in them. So the first thing, these 3 bills on this freedom agenda here, on the first page, are our priority. This is our priority docket for this legislative session. The Fundamental Freedoms Act. This is a really important piece of legislation that we believe needs to pass in order for Massachusetts to be able to protect our people from the kinds of threats that we think we might face from the federal government over the next 4 years. The first thing it does is it would bar any state or local agency or government employee from participating, colluding with, assisting with the development of any kind of registration system. That, clearly we're thinking about the so-called Muslim registry that the Trump administration is talking about. Now again, we can't stop the Trump administration here in Massachusetts from doing what it's going to do. We can, however, make sure that our state and local elected officials do not collaborate with that project. And we must. The second thing that bill does is really simple, actually. It just prevents law enforcement from collecting, retaining, or sharing information about people unless it suspects them of criminal activity. Sometimes when I tell people that, they're like, well, isn't that how it is? That the police can't spy on people unless they think you're involved in a crime? No. Unfortunately, that is not how it is. And that's a problem for two reasons. Obviously, it's a civil liberties problem. Who's most likely to be targeted by this suspicionless surveillance? People of color, dissidents, immigrants, Muslims. Same targets for most government oppression. That's a problem. So it's a civil liberties problem. But it's also a public safety problem. Because if the police are, which we found the Boston Police Department were doing years ago, are compiling records, so-called intelligence files, on people because of their political views, because they oppose the Iraq War, or because they oppose the presidency of George Bush, which is what happened when we uncovered these files in Boston, they are not figuring out how dead bodies got cold. They are not solving rapes. They are not figuring out, who is robbing everybody's house in the middle of the night, right? So it's not just a civil liberties problem, it's also a public safety problem when we allow our police to investigate people who are not even suspected of any crime. So the Fundamental Freedoms Act reifies, I think, what in state law, what most people in Massachusetts would assume is already the practice, but isn't, unfortunately. Okay, so the second bill is something that we've been trying to push for years now. Actually got a vote in the Senate a couple years ago and passed unanimously and never got a House floor vote, unfortunately. So we would really like to see this bill pass this session. Electronic Privacy Act is very straightforward. It requires a warrant for electronic surveillance on behalf of law enforcement. Whether they want to use a fancy new Stingray tool, which basically allows the police to track your cell phone as you move around, or to find you using the signals that your cell phone is sending, or whether it's that they simply want information from Verizon or Comcast or Gmail or Dropbox or Facebook or Twitter, they need to get a warrant. It's not a radical ask. It's very simple, falls in line with hundreds-year-old legal precedent in the United States, a little something called the Fourth Amendment at the federal level, and the 14th Amendment to the Declaration of Rights here in Massachusetts, which is what gives us privacy rights under the state constitution, and which, I don't know if you know, but actually served as the inspiration for the Fourth Amendment to the larger United States Constitution. So we have a special interest, I think, in maintaining privacy in the 21st century because it was born here. The Fourth Amendment was actually born in Boston. It's a cool story about that. If you're interested, I can tell you later. So that's the Electronic Privacy Act. The third bill is my baby. This was my idea to have this piece of legislation, and I'm really excited about it. It would basically mean, if this law is passed, that a database of all arrest data for every police department in the state would be made public on an ongoing basis on the state's website. And not the name of the person who's arrested, obviously we care about privacy, but the arresting offense, if they're arresting someone, if you're arrested for heroin possession, say, and the location of the arrest, and the department that arrested the person, the date and time, the sex, race, and age of the person who was arrested. Because we think at the ACLU that, we're facing this opiates crisis, right? And our public officials keep saying to us, we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem, we're not going to, so that's true. We agree. You cannot arrest your way out of something like substance abuse, right? I mean, just imagine 100 years ago thinking about prohibition with alcohol, arresting your way out of people drinking too much. Like, it's insane. It doesn't make any sense, right? And we know empirical evidence shows that that's true, that these are public health issues. Substance abuse is a public health, not a criminal justice issue. And more people are realizing this, I think, including politicians, including the Gloucester police chief, including the Attorney General, the Governor, the Mayor of Boston. I mean, everybody has said it, right? But guess what happens? Still arrest people for drugs. All the time. All the time. And you know what happens when you're arrested, right? You get a criminal record. And that criminal record makes it more difficult for you to get work. And it makes it more difficult for you to get housing if you're poor and you need public assistance. It makes it more difficult for you to get food stamps if you're poor and you need to eat. You need to feed your kids. So if we're serious about really moving away from this failed, decades-old failed model of punishing people who have health problems by arresting them, we ought to know how many times that's happening every year. And you might be surprised to know this too, but we don't. Nobody in the public knows how many people were arrested for heroin possession last year in Massachusetts. Nobody knows where those people were, like what towns are arresting more people than others. How can we make public policy if we don't know what our public officials are doing with public money, right? We can't. I mean, is anybody in here an academic, a researcher, someone who uses data in their job? Well, a lot of, I'm sure you've seen that the Trump administration has come down hard on the National Park Service, right?
Yeah.
That has been tweeting facts, okay? They were tweeting facts and they got in trouble for that. We need facts. If we don't have facts, we don't know what's happening around us and we can't figure out what's working and what's not, right? And so this bill is sort of like a public records reform 2.0. Last legislative session rather, we passed an update to the public records law, which is kind of boring. I understand, now you're falling asleep. This is really important stuff. If the public can't have access to information that government agencies hold, we don't know ourselves, we don't know our history, we don't know what's going on in government, right? No good. So we modified, we updated the public records law in the last session. This is sort of 2.0. Now we're saying, don't wait for researchers or journalists or members of the public to file these requests and then wait a year so the data's old. Put it online. We have computers now. We don't need to wait, right? And law enforcement increasingly already use systems that automate this process for themselves. So this data is available for law enforcement. It's just not available for us. And so we strongly believe that this information should be public so that we can find out, which towns are making which towns are making marijuana arrests, right? After the voters legalized marijuana. That would be interesting to know, wouldn't it? Which towns are making heroin possession arrests, and what are the races of those people? Because we know that this is really substantially a white crisis, right? Like a lot of white people are dealing with heroin abuse right now. What if we find out when we have this data that white people aren't really being arrested for possession anymore, but black people are? That would be something that we would want to know, right, as a state. And it's something that we don't currently know. So sorry for getting into the weeds so much on that one, but as you can tell, it lights my fire. So what we're asking basically is that tomorrow, next week, whenever, you call these people, both of them. It doesn't matter if he's a Republican. Call him. He's your guy. You're his constituent. He answers to you. And ask them to co-sponsor these 3 bills. Because the more people co-sponsor them, the more likely they are to pass, in the crudest terms. It's that simple. So please, reach out to them, ask them to co-sponsor these pieces of legislation, and then get familiar with the pieces of legislation on the other side too, because we're going to be asking you to help us get those passed also. I'm happy to answer questions about any of those things. Last time I was here, I talked much more at length about things like license plate readers and drones and things like that, and we're still going to be pushing legislation to deal with those problems because unfortunately we haven't solved them yet in Massachusetts. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. The first question is when you said call your people and have them co-sponsor this, is there like a particular time frame that's more suitable for
Yes.
calling them, like closer to when the bill gets into?
The time is exactly now.
Okay.
Yeah. So the deadline for co-sponsorship is February 3rd. So it has to happen between now and February 3rd, preferably now. Tomorrow would be ideal. Monday, Tuesday. Yeah.
And the second question was, if your legislator is on your side, like thinks the same as you do about certain issue, do they still have to be called?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I want to say that again. I don't know if folks heard that. If your legislator is on your side of the issue, do you still need to call them? Absolutely. And to add something to that, right? Like, I voted for Elizabeth Warren. I support her candidacy. I'm going to call her every day. and tell her something else I'm mad about. Ask her to do something else, right? Because they work for us, and she doesn't necessarily know what the people of Massachusetts want unless we tell her, right? And that is certainly true of state level officials, who I think don't get nearly the amount of contact that they should from their constituents. And I'll say one more thing about that, which is that it's not only important, I think, to call your elected representatives when you want them to do something. It's also really important to thank them when they do something that you like. Because they're people too, and they're politicians, so they're super egomaniacal, right?
Yeah.
And so they will get really happy when you tell them, thank you so much for doing that. And like, oh yeah, I'm important, I'm doing the right thing, my constituents love me. That's super critical to thank them for doing the right thing. Just as much as you want to hit them hard when they do the wrong thing, you want to thank them for showing up when it counts, yeah.
Can I just add to that? One of Joe Kennedy's things that he says about that is he needs to be able to say to people, this many people called me on this issue. It's really important. I need to do this.
Right.
And even when he's talking to other legislators,
Right.
this is how many people called me.
Right.
So it's important for you to support it too.
Exactly. In fact, I just read on the internet that people who are calling Dianne Feinstein's office about Jeff Sessions, because she sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, they're telling her, staffers are telling people calling Feinstein's office, yeah, we're not concerned about the Sessions nomination. You know why? We've only gotten 5,000 calls about that. You know how many calls we got about impeaching Bill Clinton? 30,000. Okay? So this really matters to them. They are taking notes when you call, and exactly like you said, if it's not because they disagree with you, they might agree. But they might not feel like they have the political wind at their sails, right? They might think that by doing this, that's going to threaten them in the next election, or like you've said, it could, upset their sort of negotiation strategy among their colleagues. But if they can say to their colleagues, look, man, I don't have a choice. These people are breathing down my neck. These are my constituents, and they won't stop calling me about this. That gives them exactly the political cover they need to do the right thing. So it really does not matter if you think they agree with you, call them anyway. Definitely call them anyway.
Kate, can I just mention
Yeah.
something here? So I don't know how many people know this, and I'm sure a lot of people, because you're here, do know this, but all you have to do is Google 190th General Court, which is the current General Court, and you'll go right to the legislative page, and it will give you the list of legislators, Senate, all senators, all representatives, hearings and events, for what's coming up, what room it's in, and then you go down a little further, it's got bills and laws. You can look at all the bills that are pending, including these, and then you can look at the governor's budget if you have a mind to do that, to see how that affects you. But anything you could want, pretty much, with links and everything associated with it, is right there. Just all you got to do is Google 190th General Court and play with it. Get used to it. You can actually kind of have a lot of fun there in an off moment. Sorry.
Just Google their names for the contact information.
Yeah.
I just had a comment. I wanted to thank you for coming out tonight.
Sure.
You did an excellent job.
Oh, thanks.
You're a true patriot.
Thank you.
And thank you for defending America.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So, with everything that's coming down on the sanctuary cities, where does the state level for ACLU come into play versus the national organization?
Great question. So the question was about sanctuary cities. Well, this again is another issue where our action at the state and local level is really what counts, right? Trump is threatening cities that don't go along with his plans around immigration, that he'll cut us off from federal funds for education, for infrastructure, for transit, for everything else that we need. And it's not exactly clear whether those threats will hold. There are some legal reasons to believe that he doesn't have the authority to do that, actually, in part because of the Supreme Court's ruling on the Affordable Care Act, actually, which is a little in the weeds, but it's not clear that he has the authority to do that. And people like Marty Walsh, I don't know if you guys saw his statement yesterday, but man, that was inspiring. I teared up watching that. Like, damn, Marty's really running for re-election. He was really out there. Like, you can come in my office, he said, if you need a safe space. So
He repeated himself again tonight, it was on MSNBC.
Yeah.
And they interviewed him, from Washington in his office, and he said the same thing. He said,
Yeah.
it's not about the people that break the law, it's about the unenrolled, he said.
Yeah.
And they can come to City Hall.
yeah, so we strongly support sanctuary cities. We strongly support the Trust Act, which is a law that effectively says that law enforcement at the state and local level, wherever the Trust Act is passed, what we're trying to get a state level Trust Act passed so that the state police would be
I'm not
impacted.
familiar with that. Can you describe
Yeah. So the Trust Act basically says that the police department in question, whether it's the state police at the state level or the Foxborough police here in town, if you guys become a Trust Act city, it means that the Foxborough police will not hand over people to ICE, to the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency. And that's really important. It's really important for two reasons. One, because it protects public safety. People fail to realize that if you're undocumented, which a lot of people in our state are, and you get robbed at gunpoint, or you get beaten up, or you're in a domestic violence situation, you won't call the police if you are scared that they're going to turn you over to immigration and you'll be deported, right? So that makes everyone unsafe. In a situation where undocumented people fear the police, that's not good for our communities. So the Trust Act is actually supported by a lot of police departments because they want people to call them. They want people to trust them. They don't want immigrants to fear and run away when the police come, which is exactly what happens when you have Arizona type situations where the police work hand in hand with the federal immigration authorities. So we support the Trust Act at the state level. There's a state bill that will be in the legislature this session. And then we also support Trust Act ordinances and resolutions at city and town government levels. So if that's something that you guys are interested in doing here in Foxborough, I don't know what the size of your undocumented community is, but certainly that's something that my colleague who works on that issue could help you out with if you wanted to mobilize around that here in Foxborough.
The next question I have is about Syrian refugees coming in. I know one of the temples in Sharon is sponsoring a number of families, and I'm hoping that's going forward. And the main reason it's on my mind, because I'm also WVUR junkie too, and I was just listening tonight to a report about a community in Rutland, Vermont, that has been very proactive in bringing in refugees because they don't have any manpower.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, because of the rhetoric the last, 15 months, people are getting scared unnecessarily. So they're clamping down on that. So that's my concern.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know so much in this town if anybody's sponsoring any of the Syrian refugees, but is that also something the ACLU gets involved in too, or not?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely something that we are concerned about, right? I mean, I'm not sure how many of you saw, there was a story that Glenn Greenwald's online publication, The Intercept, ran last year about the climate of xenophobia and fear that surrounded Jewish refugees who were fleeing Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 40s. But that was really, we sort of forget, I think we want to forget as Americans, how the vast majority of people in this country felt about Jewish refugees who were fleeing Nazi persecution. And it's very similar, actually, to the way that, we're seeing a lot of rhetoric that's extremely hostile. Even the similar, terrorists are gonna sneak in with the regular people. The exact same rhetoric was used to try to keep Jewish refugees out of the United States during World War II. So yeah, that's absolutely something that is very concerning to us. Here in Massachusetts, Governor Charlie Baker was one of those people who raised his hand initially and said, we don't want any of you here. We called him out for that in public and said, that's not what Massachusetts is about. We, as you know, are a nation of immigrants. Unless you're Indian, you're not from here, or black and you were dragged here against your will, right? Everyone else came here intentionally because they were seeking a better life. And many of those people were refugees fleeing religious persecution or war abroad, right? So absolutely, I mean, that's,
So is it your understanding that the state at this point is not trying to clamp down and keep refugees from coming in?
Yeah, it's our understanding that there's no,
You haven't heard of any
No.
stories? That's good.
although I have to say, even the Obama administration wasn't exactly generous. So, there aren't very many Syrian refugees here, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah,
I'm here to support you, even just as a warm body to support you coming here.
Thanks.
My question is, I signed up for the email, now you're gonna send us email, the phone calls we should make. Because I think we all need guidance, and we all wanna do stuff. We
Absolutely.
don't know exactly where to champion, so you're gonna make very specific
absolutely.
requests in these emails.
Yep.
In fact, can you send a clipboard back?
Yeah. So when you sign up, you're gonna receive, it's usually 2 emails a week. Typically one from us in Massachusetts and one from the National ACLU. And the National ACLU is gonna ask you to take action on national issues. And we're gonna ask you to take action predominantly on state and local issues, yeah.
So back to these three are gonna be voted on next week, is that your understanding?
No, so all of these bills have just been introduced into this new legislative session, which lasts 2 years, started in early January this month, and will go until the end of 2018. And the Massachusetts state legislature is a very complicated beast, but effectively what happens is that you have a very short window of time in between January and February 3rd this year, where the bills that have been filed early in the session are open for co-sponsorship. So you can just try to get as many people as possible to sign on as co-sponsors to those bills. And that's what we're trying to do right now. So they're not up for vote, they're not before a committee hearing or anything like that. We're just trying to stack the list as long as possible of names of elected officials who are supporting the legislation. Yeah.
I have the phone numbers if you want to put them up there.
Oh, cool.
You want the phone numbers?
Sure, yeah.
Jimmy's is 617
Uh-huh,
722
uh-huh.
1222.
Cool.
And Fred alias J Barrows.
Barrows.
617
Uh-huh,
722, which is the state name,
uh-huh.
2488.
All right, thanks.
You have their home numbers there by any chance?
No, I give you personal cell.
I got a couple of cell phone
Drop
numbers.
by.
Do you want
Bill,
to
have you
write
got
this
Trump's
down?
number
It's the
in your
link for
phone?
the.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, God. I think my phone might explode. I have people coming and crying all the time.
And here it is if you want to show it.
Oh, this
I
is
figured
great,
we
yeah.
lived for 8 years and the other one I could do
good
this.
kid. Oh.
Oh, this is
Who
great.
wasn't
He's a bad hombre, this guy.
Bad hombre.
He's a bad hombre.
So yeah, if you guys haven't read this, you really should, this indivisible thing. It's really useful.
Website.
I've been doing political work for a long time, and I found it really, it's very clarifying, it sort of cuts away all the chaff and focuses on what really.
Yeah, and if you sign up with your email on that, as I did, they'll send you updates.
Oh, cool.
of what's going on in the state
Awesome,
that's coming up.
that's great.
On the first page of that booklet, it does say what she said, that if you go to a pancake breakfast,
Yeah,
and what you do is there's 3 or 4 of you in the room, you
Right.
split up.
right,
And that way, they have to talk to somebody
Right.
over here, they have to talk.
Right.
So not having everybody in a little group, he doesn't dismiss the group of you.
right,
It's the next question, next question, next question.
right.
There's a lot of good tips in there.
I have a question about legislative committees.
Mhm.
So, you mentioned Diane Feinstein on the Judiciary
Yeah.
Committee, and she was our former senator from California. And when we attended an event in Sharon a couple months ago, the question was asked of Congressman Kennedy about when you're trying to lobby somebody who's not your elected representative. And he explained about how, they have a duty to their constituents, et cetera. And I recently wrote an email to Seth Moulton, even though he's not my representative, because I heard an interview of him on This American Life
Mhm.
about the Iraqis who helped us in Iraq and who aren't getting into this country.
Mhm.
So I did write him an email, and I got a response that said, "You're not my constituent, go away."
Even though you were thanking him?
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. It's just we used to call it a robo. But
Uh-huh.
anyway, my question is it effective to contract committee members in legislative committees, even if they're not your representative, to lobby for a piece of legislation?
I think it sort of depends on the legislator, on the issue. Unfortunately, there's no real yes or no answer to that question. And I can tell you right now that, you know, lobbyists do, of course, right? So when I lobby people at the State House, I'm not only lobbying my elected representatives, I'm lobbying on behalf of the ACLU, right? And we have members all across the state. So that's a tricky one. But I think that if it's something that you really care about, you shouldn't just call them. You should actually try to meet with them. If for example, you know, Brownsberger, who's the chair of the Judiciary Committee here in Massachusetts, say you really care about an issue that has to do with drug law reform, because your child had a heroin problem, right? That would be an example of something where I think actually trying to have a sit-down meeting with the chairman of Judiciary to say, like, you know, I'm not just representing myself, I'm representing mothers, right, who have so does that make sense? So if you're just like anybody and you don't have any sort of special knowledge or represent any sort of special interest group, I guess, they may not be interested to hear what you have to say. But if it's an issue that has touched you personally, that you actually have some, you know, special knowledge or, again, connection to the issue, and they're sort of the bottleneck on that problem, then I think there's a different answer. I'm sorry that's not really cut or dry, but yeah.
Can I just add to that? The other day, I kept getting this thing, call these people on this committee to keep, on the education committee, to keep Betsy DeVos from being voted out of the committee. It's not gonna do any good. So I said to myself, who do I know that lives in those states? So I back messaged on Facebook and texted North Carolina, people in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Alaska. My sister lives there and she's got 1 million relatives, right? And asked them to do it, and I kept getting messages back all day. Yes, did it. If everybody did that for any, like if you know somebody who lives in Seth Moulton's area, you know, call them. But yet, like, you know people in California. So if one of these, if we don't want them to pass out a committee, one of these people that Trump has put forth, then get some of those people that are in California to do it if that's one of their senators.
Totally.
You know, that's the kind of thing you can do. You don't have to do it yourself. Get somebody to do it for you. Tell them how important it is.
Yeah. And give them the information. I mean, you can still effectively do the lobbying.
I
Tell
gave
them what
them
to
phone
say.
numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Here's the script. This is the phone number.
And
Call.
this is what you say. That's what I do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, this may be a question more for the party members here. I guess with everything that's happened, I have a number of friends and colleagues that are like, how do we get involved? And I have to say it was a little challenging to like find the right avenue. I'm only here tonight. So what do I tell my friends? Like, what do we do? Everyone has so much energy. Like, what's the best way to help affect change?
Well, I have an answer to that, and then feel free others to jump in. One is to figure out what you care the most about, right? I think activists who are really effective are people who focus on one thing. So I would tell them, you know, are you particularly concerned about the ACA? Are you particularly concerned about women's health or, you know, privacy or drug policy or whatever it is? Figure out what you're the most concerned about. Develop expertise in that if you don't already have it. Figure out who the key players are, right? Become an expert, in other words, on that issue. And then try to link up with existing organizations, right? I think a lot of people who are new to politics and to organizing think, oh, I'm walking into this, therefore I have to create my own thing, right? That's not true. There's tons of work that's been going on for years and years. Political work, organizing, activisms, unions, all, you name it. People have been fighting the fight, right? And so they need to find what those organizations are and start going to those meetings. That's my advice, is to just figure out where you can plug in. Because if you're concerned about it, chances are other people are too, and they've been working on those issues.
I have to be issue specific. I mean, what if it literally is just, because there's lots of things that I'm worried about.
Yeah.
My children, my husband.
No,
Yeah.
We'll sign up on that individual. In 2 years, I would like to have some kind of sea change in Congress, like that's what I
It's
would.
not so much in Congress in 2 years, because what we need is districting after the 2020 census. God knows what's gonna happen with this census, with this so-called government running it.
That Congress is the way it's.
But sign up on that indivisible, because they're telling you all these opportunities are local.
Yeah,
They're
they
saying
just
how to
have
do
everything.
it.
Well,
Well,
you know, if you're concerned about a lot of things, party politics maybe is the right thing, right? Because I mean, the Democratic Party works on all those issues.
and I was just gonna say, on March 6th, over at the library, at the Boyden Library, State Party Chair Gus Bickford is gonna come down, and he's gonna meet with Democrats from the area. The way the state party is divided up, it's by senatorial districts. So some of the people in the room tonight, like Jackie and Joe Kaplan over here, and Claire and I, we are
Mr.
state
Flyer.
committee people. And so we're sponsoring him to come down and be at the Boyden Library. If you could come, 7 o'clock on March 6th.
There's a flyer
And,
at the table when you go.
Bring friends, bring those friends who are worried.
The other thing I'd say is, I don't know if anybody saw the show last time, it was the first night, we're gonna repeat it many nights, it's on Alzheimer's, and that's a huge problem. And what I wanna say is, there's a young lady, whose mother has Alzheimer's, and she just got tested herself, and she's actually in the trial. And she meets with our Senator Markey, and it just goes to show, it was a very loving, I'm not saying it's always like that, but if you watch the show, you get to see how a positive interaction with representation can go once you get involved. I mean, she unfortunately already has the genetic makeup, so it's not hard for her to get passionate about it.
Are there any other questions for Kade? Okay, I don't see any, so I want to thank you again.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Right, nice to